Jange, 'Go' 'Ban, 'Yor' 'Do, 'Mon, 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 ' Sanje Chudan Zoje Jonam Lai Jonjo Bardor Dane Gyamtso Dage Jinzo Zonam Je Rola Benje Zanje Romar Joy Zanje Judan Zoj Jonam Lai Jonjo Bardor Dane Gyamtso Dage Jinzo Bezunam Rola Benje Zanje Romba Joy Zanje Judon Zoje Jonam Lai Jonjo Bardo Gyamtso Dage Jinzo Bezunam Je Rola Benje Zanje Romba Zemjen Damje Dewa Don Devi Judan Dambar George Dungal Don Dungal Je Judan Rawar George Dungal Mebe Dewa Damba Don Medawa George Nanyalon Rabe Donyam Jambola Neba George Semjen Tamje Dewan Devi Jodon Dambar George Dungal Don Dungal Je Jodon Rawara George Dungal Mebe Dewa Damba Don Medrawara George Jodon Yalon Ralwe Donyam Jambola Neba George Semjen Tamje Dewa Don Devi Jodon Dambara George Dungal Don Dungal Je Jodon Rawara George Dungal Mebe Dewa Damba Don Medrawara George Nyering Chala Nilon Raw Jambola Neba George Dada Semjen Tamje Lo Chuzo Drawara Jinja Lamdo Zol Je Lamdo Drawara Jinja Lamdo Zol Lam Chulba Zalwara Jinja Lamdo Zol Chulba Yeshe Zo Jarwara Jinja Lamdo Zol Dada Zemjen Damje Lo Chuzo Drawara Jinja Lamdo Zol Je Lamdo Drawara Jinja Lamdo Sol Ba Salwara Jinja Lamdo Zol Chulba Yeshe Zo Jawara Jinja Lamdo Zol Dada Zemjen Tamje Lo Chuzo Drawara Jinja Lamdo Sol Je Lamdo Drawara Jinja Lamdo Sol Lam Chulba Salwara Jinja Lamdo Sol Yeshe So Charwara Jinja Lamdo Zol Mo Jen Yue Je Noi John Zom Pe Ma Ge Sara Dong Po La Ya Zen Jong Ge Ngo Ro Nye Be Ma Jon Ne Je Zo Ran Go Ran Do Ando Mon Bu Go Ra Je Zo Do Rum Je Lam Je Zo Ne Jon De Ro Jim Po La Ro Jon Da La Je Gore Ge Don Lo Den Bara Je Zo Jo Don Do Mo Ngon Don Zo Om Om Aum Benzra Gora Bema Drenza Benzra Zamaya Zarvazid Allahum Aremahareniza Ranzareyazendarim Rimzanza Gorengandru Zoijinjaloijamumbe Nam la lu la go ye jin je lo nga sung ge jin je lo ye la do je jin je lo wan je gur wa jin je lo ju je dam ba jin je lo lam je jom ba je lo ngo je dom ba jin je lo om Benzra Guru Bema Deva Dagini Gaya Abikinza Vaga Abikinza Jinda Abikinza Hum Zarva Abikinza. Good morning, everyone. Please clarify your intention for being here, that you're going to listen and practice together in order to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. The Buddhist path contains 37 practices, and these are divided into practices that are emphasized at different stages of the path. The path in any Buddhist tradition is divided into 5 phases, and these are called the path of accumulation, the path of juncture, the path of seeing, the path of meditation, and the path beyond training. The path of accumulation begins whenever you first take refuge. The Mahayana path of accumulation in particular begins with when you first take the Bodhisattva vow. The path of juncture is when you are getting close to, but not quite yet at, achieving the first of the 10 Bodhisattva levels, in the Mahayana context at least. And so it forms the juncture or segue between the path of accumulation and the path of seeing, which is the first Bodhisattva level. The path of meditation includes, in the Mahayana context, the remaining 9 Bodhisattva levels. The path beyond training, sometimes it's called it's got different names that are sometimes synonymous and sometimes not, but we'll just use one. It's the transition from the 10th Bodhisattva level to the achievement of Buddhahood. Now, there are 12 practices that are done on the path of accumulation, 10 on the path of the juncture, 7 on the path of seeing, and 8 on the path of meditation. The path of accumulation is divided into the lesser, intermediate, and greater, which means beginning, middle, and end. And there are 4 practices done on each of these levels. The 4 mindfulnesses are what are practiced in the lesser path of accumulation. Fourfold perfect relinquishment is practiced in the intermediate path of accumulation, and the 4 feet or bases of miracle are practiced in the greater path of accumulation. The path of juncture, the first half, which path of juncture is divided into 4 phases. On the first 2 phases, during the first 2 phases, what are practiced are the 5 faculties. The second 2 phases, what are practiced are the 5 powers, which are the 5 faculties amped up. The path of seeing, what is cultivated are the 7 factors of awakening, and on the path of meditation, what is called the Eightfold Noble Path. So, whatever our particular practice may be, from a basic Buddhist standpoint, we are always practicing fourfold mindfulness in the beginning. And fourfold mindfulness is the key to all the ensuing practices. For example, the practices that come after that, fourfold perfect relinquishment, consists of stopping all of the stupid things you're doing, not doing any new stupid things, doing smart things that you haven't been doing, and keeping doing smart things that you're already doing. Now, you would think, given how moralistic and preachy Buddhism often is, that this would come first, that for your first lesson you take refuge and you walk in the door and then they say, stop doing stupid things, start doing smart things, be nice, be a better person. But they don't teach that first. They start with mindfulness. And the reason is because most of the stupid things we do because we're mindless. And most of the smart things that we don't do, we do because we forget. So Buddhism actually, traditionally, does not begin with moral preaching. I mean, there will be some all along, of course. We can't resist it. But it starts with meditation. Now, meditation, of course, is the second of the 3 trainings. The first training is moral discipline. And that's because moral discipline is needed, some level of moral discipline is needed as a container, a lifestyle container for meditation. But at the same time, to become really ethical, according to Buddhism, mindfulness must be developed. So mindfulness is the tool that we use to change our lives. Now, it's a funny thing about mindfulness. The term that, and I used to try to avoid using the English word mindfulness, but then it's so standard now that you can't really get away with not using it. The word mindfulness, smriti, and drenpa in Tibetan, means memory. It's the same word that you use for the faculty of memory. And in colloquial Tibetan, you can use it to mean to think of. For example, when you miss someone, you would say, I think of them. Or you can use it for any kind of thought colloquially. So mindfulness is not a superpower. It's not something that we don't already have. And the reason why it's important to begin this discussion with this fact is when you talk about mindfulness, which of course is now its own self-help industry, right? I mean, and Buddhists are very snotty about this. They always call it McMindfulness and this kind of thing, but I think that's stupid, because one of the most traditional teachers I've ever translated for, when asked about this, said, of course it's the Buddha's blessing that there's mindfulness seminars in corporations and that people are learning mindfulness and dialectic behavioral therapy and all these things. These things help people. We can't be so well, I'll put it politely, we've got to get our heads out of our asses. We cannot be so religious that we object to people taking the aspects of Buddhism that they can use in their lives just because they don't belong to our club, or they haven't, taken the vow of refuge or the vow of this or the vow of that, It's so, I've been in large groups of Buddhists. I try to avoid that, but it does happen. And I've seen that, people get together and they sneer. And they're like, mindfulness. It's like they're talking about heroin or OxyContin or whatever it is that people are addicted to now. Mindfulness is good, even if the people practicing it don't believe in past and future lives. Get over yourself. It's good. How can you not rejoice in something that's good? Anyway, all right. So, mindfulness. All right. That was the rant. So, mindfulness is not a superpower. It's not something that you don't already have. In the Abhidharma, it's one of the, I think it's 11 things, or it might be 10, I forget. That have to be present for any intentional action. So, for example, I decide I'm thirsty and I want a sip of that water. So there has to be sufficient memory, let's just use the word memory for this, of my intention to be able, that lasts long enough for me to do this. That is all mindfulness is. It's nothing more than that. So why do we need to practice it? To lengthen it. It's easy for me to remember that I'm thirsty long enough to do that. But it's harder to maintain mindfulness for prolonged periods. However, there's a trick here. You cannot prolong periods of mindfulness by trying to prolong periods of mindfulness. And that's why we all think of mindfulness as a boring struggle. You cannot do that. It won't work. Attempting to prolong mindfulness by prolonging mindfulness is about as stupid and pointless as the old-fashioned education which thought that children won't learn unless they're beaten. I've actually argued with elderly Tibetans about this, and they said, how do your children learn so much and they don't hit them? I said, no, we've discovered that if you hit children, they don't learn. I said, no, that's not true where I'm from. Says, we only learned something when we were hit if we didn't learn it. I said, actually, it would have worked better without that, but yeah. Anyway, that's a cultural issue. So what, if you want to prolong it, but you can't do it by prolonging it, what do you do? Basically, you relate mindfulness to good feelings. When you feel good, your mind will retain that feeling as long as it can, naturally, until something that's overwhelmingly, that demands your attention, or that's overwhelmingly disturbing arises. And this is basically a kind of inertia of pleasant sensations, and we'll return to that tomorrow or this afternoon. But so the whole point of learning mindfulness, and this will be true of all four types, is it cannot be an imposition. You cannot be, you cannot bully yourself into it. And the source of feeling good is to be natural. According to Buddhism, all of our misery, all of our unpleasant physical and mental sensations, all of our unhappiness comes from being unnatural. Now, we need a footnote there that natural may not mean what we think it means. I mean, it's, you know, it might be natural for me to honk at someone who cuts me off in my thinking. That's not actually natural. The other thing we need to look at before we really begin is why there are four types of mindfulness in the beginning. There is a sequence of, not of profundity, but of immersion in these four, although I have to qualify that by saying that the order is sometimes changed. But I think when we go through them, you'll see how we're kind of starting, not externally, but we're starting with the simplest, most obvious thing, then going deeper, and then dealing with everything at once. All right, now let's actually get to it. The four mindfulnesses are mindfulness of body, mindfulness of sensations, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of dharmas. And I'll explain what dharmas are when we get there. These are practiced in different ways, using specific techniques in every Buddhist vehicle. We're going to explore these using the very simplest techniques that can apply to any vehicle. But you'll recognize what you're doing as something you're already doing. Now, Buddhism, of course, seems to be filled with contradictions. When you look at it, we're told that all of the Buddha's teachings fit together and make a cohesive and coherent presentation. At the same time, different statements by the Buddha can sound very, very different. And the key to understanding, or one key to understanding how these statements are not contradictory, is understanding how mindfulness functions and develops. So let's begin, and this will be our topic this morning, with mindfulness of body. There are two ways, broadly speaking, that mindfulness of body can be practiced. There is the simple way, or the natural way, where you simply remain present in your body. And that's what we'll be practicing this morning. The advantage of that approach is that it is open-minded to what you might discover. You might discover something about your body that conforms to the common vehicle. You might discover something about your body that conforms to the Mahayana. You might discover something about your body that conforms to the Vajrayana. The other way that mindfulness of body is taught is with content, or let's say with, I'm tempted to say with prejudice, with bias. You know, like when someone's, they're kicked out of the military, they say dismissed with prejudice or without prejudice and so on like that. It's kind of like an opinion. The simple way, you're not trying to tell yourself what your body is like. You're open-minded. But most of the practices we do with prejudice. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're trying to learn. So, for example, if you're practicing the common vehicle, you meditate on the body's impurity, how gross your body is. And you'll break down the body and think about, how many handfuls of shit are in your intestines at any given time, and how much pus there is, and how much lymph there is, and you think of your body as a skeleton. You think about all the. Basically, you try to gross yourself out. And if you're practicing the Mahayana, then you analyze your body to show that it's made up of tiny bits that are made up of tiny bits that are made up of tiny bits that are made up of tiny bits, and so on. Eventually, they're made up of nothing that you can call a bit. And so the prejudice, whereas the common vehicle prejudice is your body is impure, the Mahayana prejudice is your body is empty. And these are both true. I mean, obviously our bodies are filled with gross stuff. We all know that. And, a reading of any good Mahayana philosophy will convince you that your body's empty. But then the next time you think of something else, that's gone, so it doesn't really do much. And then the Vajrayana, of course, prejudice is that your body's nature is great purity. So you meditate upon your body as the body of a deity, and so on. All of these practices, meditation on how gross your body is, meditation on your body's emptiness, and meditation on your body as a deity, are variations of mindfulness of body. And they're very important in their respective contexts, but you can also do the same thing without content, without telling yourself anything. Simply by being aware of your body. So let's practice that for a few minutes. The technique here is simply to assume a comfortable meditation posture. And there is only one rule, which is try to keep your upper body upright, pointing straight up. And what you do with your legs should be whatever makes that not a struggle. So if you're sitting in a chair, that's fine. If you're sitting on a cushion, that's fine. Just make sure that you're comfortable sitting upright. And your hands should be at the same height as each other and at rest. So you can put your hands on the backs of your legs, or the front of your legs, behind your knees, or in your lap. Don't be too rigid with it. Because the idea here is to be completely natural. Now, this is not meditation. You're just simply trying to be in your body. It's more like post-meditation than meditation. So don't try to control your thinking. Don't try to do anything. Don't try to relax. That will make you tense. And just try to remain for a few minutes aware of your body. You can either be aware of your whole body, or of one or another part. You can go from part to part, whatever. Okay. Now, why did I say that this is not meditation? Because it's really a preliminary to what we think of as meditation. And although, as I mentioned, we often practice these in content-filled, maybe that's less pejorative than saying with prejudice, content-filled forms. We practice this at the beginning of every session of any meditation practice, at least momentarily, before we cleanse the stale air, before we clarify our intention. First thing, we adopt a meditation posture. And when you adopt a meditation posture, you should take a moment, at least a moment, before you work with your breath or you work with the clarification of intention, just to be in your body. And it's taken, I mean, this is an ongoing process, obviously. It's taken me almost 60 years to learn how to be in my body. Unfortunately, of course, by the time you're my age, you don't want to be in your body. I wish I'd been in my body when it was younger. I don't, I don't like to trade in ethnic stereotypes except when I'm telling jokes on the couch of the degenerates, but I can say this because I'm half Irish. Someone once said, I don't think it was James Joyce, but it could have been, the Irish live at some distance from their own bodies. And I don't think that's only true of my paternal ancestors. I think it can be true of many people in modern society. We have a tendency to ignore our bodies, which is ironic and yet not, considering how body obsessed we are. You would think that a culture as obsessed with physical appearance as we are, I mean, all our industries, or all our advertising rather, use human physical appearance to sell their products. I once watched a high-end automobile commercial with an elderly Tibetan woman who spoke no English and had been brought up in communist China. And I asked her, it was the high end. It was in the days when Andrea Bocelli was still, a big deal, and so it was Bocelli singing and beautiful cars and of course beautiful women. And now you have what's his name, Matthew Mahani. I don't know how to say his name, Mahani, whatever. Anyway, he's a good actor and he's nice to look at. But anyway, so you had all these beautiful women, and there were more women than cars. There was one car, but there were women everywhere. And Andrea Bocelli, la 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 la. And so I asked her. I said, "What?" I said, "This is an advertisement." She said, "Yes." I said, "What is the product being sold here?" She thought it was an advertisement for state-sponsored prostitution. Didn't occur to her that the car was what was being sold. So we're totally obsessed with this. I mean, to a degree that would astound people from other times and does astound people from other cultures. And yet, at the same time, we are, all of us, most of us, in ugly divorce proceedings with our own bodies. We join gyms. Well, not me. I wouldn't be caught. I could say I wouldn't be caught dead in one, but probably if I did go to one, I would be caught dead in one. We join gyms. We obsess about how thin or fat we are, or everything. We have plastic surgeons. We have Most of the world is dying. Most of the world is dying. People don't have water. And the people who do have water are not going to have it for very long, except, us. We'll own the water. We'll find some way to do that. And the rest of the world will die. But we have plastic surgery. I'm just saying. But we're not in our bodies. We're not. And I confront this fact multiple times a day when I bump into things, and you could still bump into things if you're in your body, but it's less likely. I'm in my head, as we say. I'm thinking. We're not in our bodies. So before we do any other meditation, on our own or in a group, the first thing we need to do is we need to take a moment, at least, to just be in our body. This has to be a prerequisite for any other thing, because we are in our bodies, whether we think we are or not. I mean, we're trying not to be. We have to give up that struggle. We just have to just be in our body. And we have to do it without judgment. We can go on to do, common vehicle contemplations about, pus and lymph, if we want to. A lot of that stuff is designed to reverse sexual desire. And they teach it even in Tibetan Buddhism. Mipam taught it, as in some of his texts and stuff, where you take an object of sexual desire and you analyze their body and you think about all the gross intestinal contents and other things that are so close to the parts you find so interesting, and that's what they teach you. And Shantideva, of course, teaches it. The Bodhisattva. And as a 21-year-old, I asked one of my teachers, being 21 and therefore thinking about sex constantly, since I wasn't having any. I was just thinking about it all the time. And I just said, should I do these contemplations? He said, no, it won't work in this culture. It'll just make you hornier. Even that gross stuff will. And I think that's true. But anyway, you can do these things if you want to. And then the Mahayana analysis, breaking the body down to show that it's just made up of bits and pieces, of course, is also useful. And of course, we do deity meditation. I mean, I love deity meditation. It's great. But if you don't first take the time to just be in your body, deity meditation will take you out of your body. And you won't be mindful. Contemplation of how gross your body is will take you out of your body, and you won't be mindful. And the contemplation of emptiness will just become denial. Emptiness is, well, we're supposed to say it's complicated, but it's actually very, very simple. The mistake we make is we mistake causation for identity. That's it. I mean, there's a lot more to it, of course, if you want there to be a lot more to it, but that's enough. And people get this all screwed up. I'm amazed, when I interpret the questions people get. People who've been studying Buddhism for 30, 40, 50 years, and they'll tell you, I've been studying Buddhism. And they don't understand the most basic principle of all Buddhism, which is that the mistake we make is to mistake causation for identity. It's very easy. I mean, not that knowing this helps me. I mean, I'm still an asshole, but it's good to know. And it's a very simple example. Am I the same person that I was when I was 8 years old? Well, The common sense answer is yes and no. Yes, because there's a unique relationship between me and that really nasty 8-year-old boy. I was such a little shit. There's a unique relationship. In other words, other people may remember the same events that I do, but not from my perspective. My relationship with that 8-year-old boy is unique, but I'm not the same person. My body is not the same. My memories are not the same. I've forgotten things that I knew then and know lots that I didn't know then. My opinions are not the same. My ways of thinking have developed, changed, and so on. So what is the solution to this apparent yes and no thing? I am the result of that 8-year-old boy. So the relationship between me and that 8-year-old is one of causation, not identity. That's it. But people don't, it's very simple. I mean, it's common sense. But people don't get this. And then they think when you say that the consciousness that dies is not the same consciousness that takes rebirth, then they think that you mean that you don't actually have to experience the results of your actions. But it means that the consciousness that I have today is not the same as the consciousness I had yesterday, but I'm experiencing the results of my actions yesterday. If I ate something horrible yesterday, I'll feel sick today. I didn't. I'm fine. I did give myself food poisoning a couple of weeks ago. That was no fun. I bought some tomato sauce at a supermarket. I won't mention by name, but it's down the road. And you know, I just added it to the pasta I cooked without cooking it. And the next day, I woke up, I was okay. But as the day went on, I mean, I got to the firefly stage. You know, the stages of death, you can actually, there's when earth dissolves into water, which means not that all the solids in your body disappear, like in that X-Men movie where the guy turns to jelly. Bruce Davison was the actor. No, it means that your body becomes very, very heavy and you can't move, and you'll see smoke. Or, no, sorry, a mirage thing. Some people say smoke comes first. For me, it's the mirage. And then when water dissolves into fire, then you get very, very thirsty, and your eyes and everything starts to dry up. And at that point, you'll see smoke. Well, by that night, I got through the mirage and the smoke, and I got to the point where the fireflies showed up, and they looked just like fireflies. And that's when water dissolves into air. No, fire dissolves into air. That's 3/4 of the gross withdrawal. That's probably as far as you can get and come back without being in a hospital. You can get much farther if you're in a hospital, and they'll bring you back. But I was really sick. I mean, that was the closest I think I've actually come to death. It was really interesting, but I wouldn't have described it that way at the time. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. That's an example of not being mindful, see? So before you do any other meditation practice, you need to first just be in your body. Now, this afternoon we'll be looking at mindfulness of sensations. And it's a little tricky because usually, since sensations change more rapidly than the body does, when we try to just be in our body, we often find ourselves being mindful of sensations and not the body. You know, for example, when we just did this a few minutes ago, I found myself feeling sensations in my legs, feeling sensations in my back, and so on. And then I just kind of let that go. The generic purpose of this, the generic benefit of this, of course, is that this is the forms literally and figuratively the container for all other mindfulness. Being mindful of your body is the first step in being mindful of anything. If we're not mindful of our bodies, then we can't really effectively be mindful of anything else. But it has at least three other benefits that are significant. When we looked at the two ways to practice mindfulness of body, the simple way, which we do at the beginning of a meditation session where you just take a moment just to be in your body, and then the more complicated way, which is with content. In either case, you will confront, if you practice this regularly, you will confront your body's impurity, emptiness, and great purity. Even if you don't do deity meditation, you may at some point, there are no guarantees, of course, experience your body's great purity, probably after experiencing its emptiness, which will be after experiencing its impurity. Now, each of these experiences can serve, if you don't fixate on them, as a remedy for a particular problem. And that's the three other benefits. So the first benefit is that it's the container for all other forms of mindfulness, and that the other three principal benefits are more particular. The reason why mindfulness of body may at some point cause you to confront your body's impurity is that we, along with and are living outside our bodies or trying to, we are in denial. We are all in some level of denial because we live in the past. In my dreams, I'm usually quite a bit younger than I am. And as I've said while teaching here before, every morning when I shave, I'm horrified to see that face. Because I can't keep up with the process of rotting alive that we call aging. It's my imagination, or my mindfulness, my whatever, is way behind. I'm living in the past. And every time I actually see that face in the mirror, which only happens once a day, I only use them. Some people brush their teeth in front of the mirror. I find that strange. Don't you know where your teeth are? Are you worried you're going to brush here or there? Or, and then when they do it, then they spray toothpaste all over the mirror. I don't know why some people do that. So I only use the mirror to shave. And because I don't really want to look at that more than I have to. So clearly, I'm in denial. I'm in denial of aging. I'm in denial of impermanence. I'm in denial of everything, and I think most of us are. So one of the emphases in the common vehicle is to transcend our denial. So if there is anything about your body that you are denying, then you will confront it through mindfulness of body. The second of these particular benefits comes from experiencing your body's emptiness. And that is, can be, a remedy for fixation. All of our fixation on external solid matter is based upon fixation on the physical matter of our own bodies. Because we think of the body as a thing, we think of other things as things. Like, that's a drum. I would call that whole thing a drum. But if you took the drum out of the drum stand, I would call the drum part the drum, and I would call that the stand. And then if you pick the drum apart, of course, I'd call, the drum head, the tacks, or whatever the things that attach it, the frame, the wood. And if you, broke the wood part into pieces, I'd just call it wood, painted wood, broken pieces, painted wood. But nevertheless, that's the drum. If I said to any of you, where's the drum? You'd point to that. We all know where the drum is. Well, we're like that because we're like that with our body. And we're not to blame for this. Our body is our body. We have a unique relationship with it. It's the only one we've got. It's the only one we know. We know it has different bits and pieces, and they can even cut some of them out or cut some of them off, or, and we can have all sorts of things, but it's our body. As long as all of this is still attached together, it's our body. Like the hair is my body until I shave it, and then it's in the garbage, and that's not my body anymore. It was my body, but it's not my body. And because of that, because we believe that our bodies are real, and this is not, maybe even believe is the wrong word, because I don't know if animals believe, but they have the same fixation. As we feel that the body is real, we feel that what the body experiences is real. Ultimately, of course, everything we experience, including our bodies, we experience with our minds. We know that. That's no secret. That's no revelation. But, we say seeing is believing. If we can see it, we can smell it, we can taste it, we can touch it, or then it's real. And all of that is because we believe that our senses are real. Because our senses are real, and what our senses experience are real. And even though we, you can read books about the science of perception, cognitive biology, and different sorts of things, and while you're reading them, they'll shred that. But then as soon as you put the book down, it's back. It doesn't really make much of a difference. For me, anyway. So the experience of the body's emptiness can be an effective remedy for fixation on the existence of physical things. But there's a third level of problem that we have surrounding our bodies. And this is judgment. We are in denial of our body's impurity. We fixate on our bodies as permanent, which they're not. Units, which they're not. And independent, which they're not. But beyond that, we are constantly in a state of judgment. And judgment is one of the things, the deity meditation which is the Vajrayana practice of mindfulness of body, overcomes. It's meant to overcome. But it can also be confronted through simple mindfulness of body. Ironically, we would say, you would have to say that our denial of the body's impurity is actually a symptom of judgment. We are in denial of our body's impurity because deep down we know, and we don't like it. We judge our body. As long as we think that the body is a thing, that this concept body describes an indivisible unit, something that is unchanging, something that is independent, that can be clearly separated from everything else, we remain in judgment of it. Now, it's easy to understand that the body is not an indivisible unit. You can break it down mentally and, unfortunately, sometimes physically. It's easy to understand that the body is not a permanent because we observe our bodies changing. It's harder, perhaps, to understand that the body is not independent because it's very easy for us to say, to find the boundary or border between body and not body. My body is everything from the top of my head to the tips of my toes, from the skin and little hairs inward. That's body. Everything outside that is not body. If that's true, then that would mean that the breath that is within my lungs now is body, but when I breathe it out, it's not body. And the food that I use as fuel, well, in my case, mostly storage, I think, but it's supposed to be fuel, right? My body actually is, I don't mean this in a bad way, my body is a storage facility. It's not an energy production machine. You know, some people, I know people who can like eat all day and they just get thinner, more active, but thinner. If I look at food, I get fat. And it's like, I don't get energy from eating. Eating makes me tired. My body is a storage facility. My body, it just, expends no energy that is not absolutely required. It's astonishing. So, it's harder to see the independence of the body, but if you look very, very specifically, you'll see that supposedly clear boundary, clear border between body and not body, or inside and outside, is not as clear as we think. Well, why does it seem so clear? It seems so clear because our body is, in part, composed of 5 sense organs. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and everything in our body on the surface of it and the inside that can feel, that has tactile sensation. And because of that, then it's normal, let's not say natural, but it's normal for us to divide the world, in the physical world, into objects of the senses and the senses themselves. And we call objects of the senses not body, and the senses body. Except there's a problem, because the body is also an object of the senses. I can look at my own hand. Does that mean that hand is not body? No, the hand is body. but it's a sense object. And if I touch the palm of my right hand with the forefinger of my left hand, I can feel it. Actually, both are feeling it. And all sorts of other things. You know, you can... so, mindfulness of body can eventually bring you to the experience where the not only the body's unity, but also and permanence, but also its independence or separateness, as the concept of it can be broken down. And then finally, as I mentioned, the judgment. Okay, questions? I think it's better to do questions and answers each session because you're listening to only one language, which if it goes on too long, everyone will fall asleep. Can you use the mic, please? It'll pass. Well, hopefully with less. Hopefully with less.
Okay. When you said the body and sensation are two separate objects of mindfulness, is that saying more of the body and how it occupies space where we sense it? Is it more proprioceptive? Like I'm not upside down, but feeling the chair against my back is being mindful of sensation and being aware of where my body's boundaries are and how I'm oriented in space. Could you clarify a little bit more?
Well, there is a you know a bit of a crossover between these two. Thank you. But the difference is that with mindfulness of sensations, normally you pick a predominant sensation. And mindfulness of body, as I think I mentioned, you can either pick a certain part of the body or the whole body. Eventually, you want to get to the point where the practice of mindfulness, once you've gained a certain facility with all four of them, you're mindful of whatever requires your attention.
Okay. Because when we were doing that little session, and then you commented, what I realized is that I was aware of everything that was up against or not up against my body, the chair, the floor, one ankle across the other.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. I mean, we don't want to be too heavy-handed with this. You know, you just, it's, the first one is really being in your body. And that will naturally bring some mindfulness of sensations with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Drama Lama.
Drama Lama. It's because of the shirt. I was given a shirt that says "No Drama Lama," and it's somewhat given my...
A little irony.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, judgment.
Yes.
Big issue for me, the judgment thing. And judgment as a word is really weighted because it implies critical judgment as opposed to open judgment.
Yes.
Okay, in my work as a journalist, I'm constantly judging.
Yes.
In my practice, I'm trying not to be so judgy.
Yes.
Do you have advice on how to finesse this
Yes.
area?
Yeah. Although it's advice that I'm great at giving advice. I'm just not really good at taking my own advice. we need to make a distinction between meditation and post-meditation until we don't. And until we don't means for the foreseeable future. And the distinction is largely a distinction between a situation where let me give you a practical example. When you're meditating, so this is, I mean real meditation, not, visualization of something. Strictly speaking, we don't present it that way, but strictly speaking, any situation where you're engaged in intentional mental activity, such as visualization and saying mantras, is considered post-meditation. Actual even placement in Vajrayana is really just Mahamudra or Dzogchen. But nevertheless, most of us spend most of our so-called meditation time doing visualization and practices, and those are very important. But and the reason I make that distinction is because in those situations you are picking and choosing what to think. You're, no, I'm not blah blah, I'm Chenrezig, and no, this sound is not a car going down 9G, that's Omane Peme Hom, and so on. So you are engaging in content. You're tilting the machine. But in actual meditation, the practice of Mahamudra or Dzogchen, you're not doing that. All thoughts are equal. So if a judgmental thought arises, you simply look at its nature. You don't try to censor it. Because judgment of judgment is exactly the worst thing you can do. But in post-meditation, where our thoughts are going to cause us to act, we need to pick and choose. So, for example, if I'm driving, I need to judge distance. I need to judge, safety. I need to make, choices, and so on. And I need to think only about the driving and the road conditions and the other things, and so on. So there's no real contradiction between the need for judgment in your profession and the need to be free of judgment in your meditation. Now, it depends also on exactly what your journalism consists. In other words, if you're an opinion writer, like some people do, then what's required, of course, is to be to state your opinions about things, and hopefully in an amusing way. Like Dave Leonard for the Times does that. And if you're a fact journalist, you remember facts? We used to have facts. Facts were not opinions. Facts were things that different people could agree on. We don't seem to have those anymore. Anyway, if you're a fact reporter, then just the facts. But of course, there's judgment involved in which facts. But yeah.
I have a question. So Sarah has teaching on the 4 signs of Mahamudra. The first sign is mindfulness. And just recently, I came across this statement that relative truth is known through mindfulness. And it sort of caught my attention.
Saraha uses the term mindfulness because he uses mindfulness and no mindfulness and so on in a very advanced way. All of Saraha's teaching is about Mahamudra. In fact, it's the gold standard for Mahamudra. And I suspect that what he's doing is making a distinction between the need for effortful mindfulness of mind and the point where no effort is needed, which would probably be what he means by no mindfulness. I think what he's talking about is probably what it is more commonly, or in more modern, is called non-meditation or no meditation, and so on at the higher levels.
Drenpa and Drenme.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm guessing.
that's what the actual words are
Yeah.
in the 4 signs. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that certainly effortful mindfulness can only be a mindfulness of relative truth. Because effortful mindfulness is still in the realm of subject and object.
Thank you.
You know what we need here for the mic? These things like they used to have in stores where you could tip something and then scoot it over on the ceiling.
I do chaplaincy work, and I often work with people that are suffering what they articulate as grief as a consequence of loss. And we often identify that with body parts, you know, as in heartache. Okay. And I was listening and reviewing the notes in terms of, well, how would one assist another in being mindful of the body in order to alleviate that kind of suffering?
I think that any help that mindfulness can give to a grieving person would most likely come into the third or fourth,
Okay.
the mindfulness of things and mindfulness of mind.
Okay.
It's interesting, though, that you know, we certainly identify emotions with different parts of our bodies.
Right.
In many cultures, we identify feelings with our heart. You know, grief and joy and so on. Tibetans, in Tibetan, of course, they always thought of the heart as the seat of consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you find other less transcultural, I think, references when they talk about entrusting yourself entirely to a path or a practice or a teacher. They'll often say "lo ning dong sum." No, and but lo can be mind or the thinking mind, but sometimes they'll put it spelt like lungs. I trust my chest, heart, and lungs to them. And I'm not sure where that comes from, because there is a notion in Tibetan that the lungs are the seat of conceptualization, and also that the worst of the meat. Like if they talk about when you carve up an animal, you know, the lungs are the least savory part. And many Tibetan metaphors go back to cooking, usually meat cooking. So I don't know. But in terms of grief counseling, when appropriate, it would probably be mindfulness of mind and mindfulness of thoughts. The problem is, of course, that the desire to get rid of grief is unhealthy.
Interesting.
You know, typically we get rid of grief by distracting ourselves from it, or we try to. And that causes it to burrow deeper, I think. And I know that events that I have not sufficiently grieved, that grief has lain in wait and becomes an overreaction to something that triggers, I don't know, the same synapses or something like that. So well, you know more about this than I do, but grief is like physical pain, and both in some cases require palliative care, but to attempt to get rid of them can cause worse.
Yeah, and that wasn't my focus. My focus was more on supporting the individual and assisting them in processing the grief. Yeah, but that's very helpful. Thank you.
Hi, Yeshe. I'm just listening to Giselle, and is it okay if I just share something very, very quickly with her in terms of what has helped me in therapy? I've been treated for suicide ideation because of a very traumatic upbringing, and one of the many coping methods that my therapist had recommended is grounding the senses. So, and it's very easy, but it has helped me not be aware of what's going on in the mind, but at the same time, 5 things I can touch, 5 things I can smell, 5 things I can see, 5 things I can hear, any tasting. Yeah, just, and then just keep reciting, just be with it. This is before I started Buddhism. Be with it, cry through it, whatever, but not to lose my mind, not lose myself and be overwhelmed. So part of me is grounded and part of me is crying, whatever I need to. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, context and environment seem, when we're obsessed with something, and I can be very obsessive. I actually have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And you can imagine what this religion has done to that, with all the bloody counting and don't do this and don't do that, and then the notion of interdependence, and everything matters, everything might mean something. It's like, and all the magical thinking, and anyway, too late now. But so I really wonder how many religions were designed by people with OCD. It's like, really, there's at some point somebody had to come along and but when we're obsessed with something, I've, in my experience, and I'm talking about experiences that are for the most part less intense than what Eva was sharing. It almost causes us to get kind of what's the tunnel vision and ignore the environment. And the type of practice that Eva was describing is a way of reestablishing context, I think, an environment. And but we'll come to that a little later also.
Thank you, Yeshe. When we did the short practice of being in our bodies, you said be in our bodies. How does that relate to the idea that we cannot find the location of our mind? Is that our mind that is in our bodies? What is in our bodies when we are here in our bodies?
We will be looking at that tomorrow morning.
Okay.
That's what we'll be talking about tomorrow morning. That's mindfulness
Very
of
good.
mind.
Good.
Yeah. It's very, very hard. You can't totally separate these four things. That's why it's easiest to think of them as a kind of a gradation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yeshe. We touched on a subject that's one of my very favorite ones about the body. It's something I've been studying since 1979. And I really love to hear these things you are teaching us from the Buddhist point of view, because I have a lot of faith. And what the thing is that I think what you're saying, and this is what I wanted to kind of clear up, is that one of the things that I have been, my mind is into, whether, I don't know, is that the body is also the mind. The mind and the body are not separate, really. It's just that the mind is kind of, it's just so complicated, At one point, I've seen the body like the universe. I mean, it's really non-conceptual. It really isn't. But I really appreciate, because we do need these tools to help us to become bodhisattvas, to use bodhicitta.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's, the more I look at it,
Mm-hmm.
we're really all of us miracles, and
Mhm.
so is the earth and the whole business. It's all, I think, I don't, like Dharma chat. It's all Dharma. Really, it's just it's our personal mind that creates the delusion. From what I can, from so far, but it's true. The judgment comes in, and the idea that I know how you should live,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that I'm just really more anxious to hear more about this. I think my feeling is that there's a connection that is not conceptual,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Well, you touched on a lot of different things, but the basic question with which you began about the relationship between the body and the mind. In some presentations of Mahamudra, Mahamudra is less standardized in modern presentations than some other comparable systems like Dzogchen. Most Dzogchen teachings hit certain bases and have the same steps in modern presentations. Although there are other teachings that are less used. Mahamudra can be presented in many, many different ways. For example, you were talking about the Sarahas, Dohas, which have their own terminology. And then we find many, many other. But in the Karma Kagyu presentations of Mahamudra, principally the works of the ninth Karmapa, Wangchuk Dorje, he puts a great deal of emphasis on exploring this question, the relationship between the body and the mind. And he teaches an analytical meditation where you do that, where you analyze the relationship between the body and the mind, and you actually question assumptions. The assumption that they're different, the assumption that they're the same. And I mean, to somewhat oversimplify a very profound and quite lengthy explanation, to say that the body and the mind are different is wrong. To say that they're the same is wrong. If the body and the mind were the same, which of course is what scientific materialism, and by materialism I mean those who assert the primacy of matter over cognition. Scientific materialism, and the advocates for the, and I'm not equating this with science, but the view, the philosophical position that cognition is simply an artifact of evolution, and that therefore that cognition is a symptom of a certain is an evolutionary adaptation, and that therefore when the body dies, cognition ceases, that the being ceases. If that is true, which I don't believe or I wouldn't be here, then we could say, if that were true, we could definitely say that the body and the mind are the same thing, because there could be no mind without the body. And then we could simply say that the mind, the consciousness, is really an artifact of processes going on in the brain that depend upon the whole body. This is called the hard problem of consciousness, because no science has been able to find the mind. They can track movements of mind, they can track use and proportion of use of different parts of the brain. Bardor Rinpoche sent me a message yesterday. There's now on Netflix. There's a series, and it shows Mingyur Rinpoche on the thing. That was back when he's a little plumper because it was before his retreat. They hooked him up, and they found that he was so happy that they couldn't measure it. So they settled on a number, but it was way below what he, and but if Buddhism is what we could call traditional Buddhism, with belief in past and future lives and so on, is correct, then it would be wrong to say that the body and the mind are the same, because the mind can exist independent of a body. That's something that is, for us at this point, is a matter of belief. No. People who actually experience astral projection, and there are dream scientists who Stephen LaBerge, I remember reading, didn't believe in astral projection. He thought it was just a form of lucid dreaming, but several people I've spoken to believe that they've experienced it. I've never done it. I wanted to learn to do it, but I was never able to do it. But if that would constitute some kind of proof, I think, personally, but not scientific proof because it's anecdotal. But and then the evidence of these children who remember previous lives and so on, if it can be validated. Of course, there are lots of ways of faking that. There are lots of ways of giving people hints. Do you remember? the flower, hint, hint, you know. So, oh yeah, you know. But I think that there are so many that it would seem less likely. So if cognition can exist without a body or pass from one body to another, then it would seem incorrect to say that the body and the mind are the same thing. On the other hand, whatever we experience physically is ultimately the mind, right? That's why we have anesthesia. You know, general anesthesia just prevents your mind from experiencing what's happening to your body temporarily. But in the absence of that, when I feel something, a pleasant or unpleasant sensation, a pleasant or unpleasant taste, it's my mind that experiences it. So it would also be incorrect to say that they are separate.
Yeshe, can I make a quick announcement? Everybody, lunch downstairs. There's some vegetarian meatballs and homemade pasta sauce and fruit salad, and everybody's welcome to come. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's bringing the mind, body, spirit together. You know, is that something like?
Well, spirit is a tricky thing in Buddhism. I'm always fascinated when people argue that something can have a mind but not a soul. Like some religious traditions will assert that the soul is different than the mind. And, you know, people who believe that animals don't have souls, well, animals clearly have minds. If they didn't have minds, they wouldn't act. They couldn't feel. And I think that the soul is the mind. I mean, it's the mind that experiences. It's the mind that determines things. Spirit is an interesting term. In Tibetan, there is a concept called La, not deity, La, but La, which Tibetan Buddhists argue with one another about whether this was a Buddhist concept or a pre-Buddhist Tibetan concept. Certainly there are texts that purport to have been written by Buddhist masters from India that talk about it. But the Karmapa had told me he thinks it's just from Tibetan culture, but it's very much like the Ka in Egyptian eschatology. Anyway, Egyptians' notion of what happens when you die. And the La, which I tend to translate as spirit because I don't have any other word for it, is not the person. It's in your body. You may experience it in dreams as a friendly animal or something like that. And it's and it stays with, they say, it stays with after you die, it stays where your body is interred or scattered for 10 years and then dissipates. It's not a sentient being. It's something that helps you. But when Buddhists try to sell what they consider auspicious interment sites, they'll often use a kind of carrot stick advertising to do with the law. They'll say because if the body's put in an inauspicious location, the law will be unhappy and it will harm your surviving family. And then you say, well, then you're saying it's a being, because if it has a mind, it can be unhappy. If it's not a being, doesn't have a mind, it can't be unhappy. And I say, no, it's not a being. So I don't know, and I don't know what this is, but it's very much part of the of Tibetan astrology and Tibetan funereal customs and so on.
Is it close to prana?
No.
No.
No. Well, No, they distinguish. They say la tse sok sum. Sok is prana. We tend to use the word prana in English for the lung in Tibetan, but lung is actually vayu and includes prana. Prana is one of the 10 types of lung, but I mean, we can almost say lung is prana. But la is spirit, tse is longevity, and sok is your life force. Prana is life force in the Tibetan understanding. It's what keeps you alive. If your
Okay.
prana goes, then you go.
All right. Thank you.
Do you know that when Oscar Wilde was dying, apparently he really said, and I think I'm getting this from the Richard Ellis biography, he woke up and just before he died, and he looked at the wallpaper and he said, either that wallpaper goes or I go, and then he died. I think that's true, not apocryphal, but don't trust me because I can misremember things.
I just have a general question about mindfulness of body. You said associating the faculty of mindfulness with positive things can prolong it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have this phenomenon, maybe it's definitely in my generation, of like bad body image and
Everybody has
and
that.
so everybody has it. And so a lot of people, that's something they're trying to overcome is bad
Mhm.
body image.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think maybe people would be triggered by this practice. And so how can this mindfulness of body sort of be approached in a way that's not damaging to like bad body image? What are some of the
But two ways.
differentiations?
If it's practiced as a separate practice, then they would have to go through it, like driving through a storm to get to the other side. Because you would first confront bad body image. But bad body image is not mindfulness of body. It's actually the maintenance of, as the term implies, an image of the body that's not accurate. You know, and this is evident when you talk to someone who has a strongly negative image of their own body, and they describe how they see themselves, and you will see them completely differently. And you can't argue someone out of it, but one way is if they did this as a prolonged practice, they might be able to pass through it. The other way that this can not excite it is if it's done briefly at the beginning of a session. And eventually what we're going to look at is how to combine all four mindfulnesses in one session, in any meditation session. A negative body image in our culture at this time, I think, is a result of our advertising and entertainment industries. It's interesting that if you look at you watch films, American films. Now, almost invariably, the actors and actresses are clearly engaged in dramatic physical training. You can see it, and less so in European, British films, but there's still some, And of course, the advertising industry just has certain body types that they use, and so you're constantly bombarded with images of people. All the men have six packs, and all the women have, I don't know what. All the women are starving. And That's causing a problem. Another thing is, what's it called? I must have it on my iPad. But because I don't use it. Maybe I don't have it on this one. Instagram. One of the more acerbic but enjoyable late night hosts made a remark a couple of weeks ago. I get these things on bulletins. I don't have TV. That Instagram, and like other social media, is creating a terrible plague of loneliness and negative self-image. Because what people post on Instagram makes it look like they're having tremendous amounts of fun that you're not having. And so basically when you go on these social media, which I don't, I got them so that I could communicate with my daughter. She still doesn't really communicate, so I don't, Now you have to have Facebook. If you don't have Facebook, you can't even contact Dharma centers. Everything's... email is kind of like a thing of the past, right? It's only used in business. Nobody emails anybody anymore. It's like people who email are like, they're all my age or older. Now everybody just instant messages, or they have there's the green one and then the white and blue one. That's how I remember them. I don't remember what they're called. Messenger and message. And anyway, all these social media show people having fun for the most part. If you get a lot of political stuff, that's different. And they make you think that those people are having more fun than you are. Which isn't always the case, but and I think that's part of it. Again, as with grief, I think that ultimately it's mindfulness of mind and mindfulness of thoughts that will help with this. Because one of the illusions that I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but one of the illusions that we must confront, each of us, whether we're Buddhist or not, is the illusion of moods. Moods are just series of thoughts. The mood does not exist outside the thoughts. And if you can learn to recognize that, you are less, and I'm not saying I'm not moody, I'm moody as hell, but you're less victimized by your own moods. And this is something that they teach in dialectical behavioral therapy and other forms of really useful stuff that when Buddhists diss that stuff, I think they're worried about money. That's what I think. They say, oh no, the money's going there, not to me. I'm sorry. That's just, I like Buddhists, I got nothing against us. I just kind of, I don't like narrow-minded, head up our ass stuff. And I think that, everything, the Tibetan way of dealing with this is very sweet. Everything that's good, they'll say, comes directly or indirectly from the Buddha. It must have been some Buddha or Bodhisattva must have come up with that, whether you know it or not. So everything good is good. If it's good, then it must be, Oh, it's time. Yep. No, you can ask one more.
It might have gone on just a bit, so you can just tie it up in a neat little package. In In my life, in a lot of people's lives, there have been brushes with the paranormal, and now as a Buddhist, I have, and people have asked me, well, these ghostly type things, what do Buddhists say about it? My understanding now is that the mind stream leaves, goes wherever the bardo reincarnates, whatever, and what we're left with is law. And the question that I have is, do Tibetans think the law has consciousness, free will? And just very, very quick story. When my grandmother died, my mother moved into my house with the ashes. That's not what my grandmother wanted. And for the first time ever in our house, we had banging, banging, banging in the walls. And my mother said it's because of my demonic Buddhist practices. And I said, no, this is between you and your mother. I have nothing to do with this. Sure enough, when my grandmother was interred where she wanted to be, the banging stopped. I got to say, ha. And later on, a friend of mine, actually somebody here, said, you know, your grandmother is happy now. She's where she wants to be. I said, could you put that in writing for my mother? You know. But does the law, or what we call ghost, have free will, have consciousness, you know? And that's all I'll ask right now.
Well, some lamas are very quick to equate ghosts with law and say that every time there's a poltergeist disturbance or any other, I mean, the ghosts can manifest in all sorts of ways. They can be visual, people see them. I've tried to see them. I've gone to places where other people see ghosts. I've slept in rooms which are supposed to be haunted, and I never get to see anything. So, you know, to quote the little boy in the Sixth Sense, I don't see dead people. I'm not sure that ghosts are always law. And I think that they're quick to say that because they don't want to complicate their comic book presentation of reincarnation.
Okay.
I think it's a lot more complicated.
Okay.
But they like to simplify things because it's a culture that's still, the religious culture is still medieval. So, you know, in medieval, you know, the world's symmetrical and there's 4 continents and everything. It's like simple.
Yeah.
I think that it's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay.
And if you press educated lamas, they'll assent to that it is more complicated. I've heard different things. They'll always tell you that the ghost is not the person, until sometimes they'll differ, and then they'll say it is. But usually they'll say, if they want to frighten you, they'll say it's a demon taking the, you know, not that we really have demons, but, you know, we have spirits, that it's a spirit taking the form of the deceased to manipulate you. They'll say that typically if they want to discredit someone, a psychic or something like that. Which again is usually because they're competition. Or they'll say in good faith that it's often the law, but I don't think it's always the law. I think sometimes it is the consciousness of the person. That being said, the law does not seem to be a sentient being in the presentation. It seems to be an artifact of a person's presence, if it exists, if it's not just hoo-ha, you know. And I tend to think it exists because, why not? You know, like I believe Australia exists. I've never been there, but you know.
People say.
So I don't think the law is a sentient being, and if it's not a sentient being, although one teacher I sometimes translate for us, when pressed, said he thought it might be a type of sentient being that then dies 10 years after the person dies and takes another birth, but it's not the person. If it is a sentient being, then it has as much free will as we do.
So almost like we're a host, and whatever we is, this body and this mind, and then we've got this little friend.
You've got lots of stuff in there because
Okay.
you've got God's sort of protector spirits or gods that come from your father's family, from your mother's family. You've got you know, and it's hard to know how much of this is cultural, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. But you've got the kitchen god, like in Chinese culture. You've got, you know, the hearth god. You've got warrior gods and different sorts of things. And it's possible to say that this is just people have dreams and they take the dreams to be real. But I tend not to dismiss anything just because the things that I've dismissed in some cases have turned out to be close to the truth. We're over time, so I need to stop, but I can give an instance of that this afternoon if you want.
Okay, and if you can refer us to any text that may have a nice synopsis
Of law?
of what you were just discussing, because I've wanted to gather more
see,
information.
the thing is, I think that there are ghosts, and I'm not sure that they're not.
Oh, but you
always-
were talking about all the stuff that's inside,
Oh,
the
yeah.
different gods and
It's in the
levels of
fire puja
consciousness.
that we do. There's lists of them in the fire puja that we do at Losar.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So for now, we'll just use the one stanza dedication on the top of page 7, and then this afternoon we'll do the whole one. Sunam di tamje zikbahanye tobne nyepe ranam pamjene chega nachi balap trukbahi sipe tsole dorwa. Thank you, and bon appetit.